Hi class, hope everyone's doing well. Just wanted to go through an example of using multiple classes in an application in a project. So also wanted to go through examples with using mutators and accessor methods, also known as setters and getter methods. Also wanted to go through using creating constructors, constructor overloading, and just in general information that could help you not only with the lessons that have been learned over the past few weeks, but also with the milestone 2. So let's just go through this example. In this example, we're going to create a class for a dog. So we're just going to keep it simple. I just kind of want to go through the different concepts. So we're going to create a class for a dog. The dog's going to have a name as well as a list of toys. So we're going to create another class that's going to be used to test this dog class. We're going to call that class dog test. So let's get started with the dog class. So again, the dog is going to have a name. So let's create instance variable called a name. The name will be a string. So I wanted to show you the reason why we use getter and setter methods. So before making this instance variable private, we're just going to make it a public variable and show you what happens when you keep it public. So I'm going to say string name for the dog. Notice this is outside of the main method, right? Because these variables are part of the dog class. So it's under the dog class, not within the main method. The main method is used for actually when you run this file, it's going to run whatever's in the main method, but not necessarily means that what you put inside the main method will be attributes of the class. So we want to make sure that we put the variables of the class, the methods of the class, under the class opposed to under the main method. So we have the string name and we have an array list of strings to store the toys. We'll call it toy list. Okay. So we have two variables for the dog. So let's actually create an instance of a dog and modify these variables. So we're going to create another class called dog_test. So this is analogous to your recipe_test class. So let's create the new class, call it dog test, finish. Okay, so here we have our dog test class. So in this dog test class, we're going to create a main method. So public static void main string dogs. Okay, so we have our main method. So inside this main method, what we're going to do is we want to actually test the dog object that we just created. So let's create an instance of that dog object. So we're going to say dog, we're going to call it dog1 equals new dog. So remember that this is now we're using the default constructor, right? We didn't actually create any constructor in the dog class, right? We didn't do any constructor overloading or anything like that. So we're just using the default constructor. Okay, so that's why there are no parameters. So let's actually modify the dog name. So because the dog instance variables that we created are not private, we can directly access them, which is not necessarily a good thing, but I want to show you what happens when you do keep them public. So we could say dog1.name equals, we're going to call this dog Chance. Okay, and dog1.toyList equals new array list, and dog1.toyList, we're going to add a toy called ball. Okay, so now we have a new dog object, and we set the name and the toy list array, which just has one toy called a ball. So this is error because we need to actually import the array list. So let's import java.util.ArrayList. Okay, so now the error went away. Okay, so now we have an instance of a dog. So this is fine. However, remember, this is not ideal. We don't want other classes outside of the dog class to have direct access to these instance variables, right? we want to control how these variables are retrieved and how they are set. So this is the reason why we actually create these getter and setter methods, right? Also known as accessor and mutator methods. Okay, this is the whole idea of encapsulation. You want these instance variables, these properties of the dog class to be private, right? To be local to its class only. You don't want other classes outside of the dog class to have direct access to these variables. So what we want to do is make these private. So notice once we make these private, if we go back to the dog test class, look what happened. Now we have an error, right? And notice the error says name has private access in dog. So now we can't directly access them, right? We can't just say dog1.name, dog1.toylist. Now we have to actually create these getter and setter methods to allow us to modify these dog properties. So let's create those getter and setter methods. So in the dog class, we're going to let's create our getter methods first. So the getter methods, remember, are going to return the appropriate data type, the appropriate instance variables. So we need one for the name, and we need one for the array list for toy list. So let's create the one for name. So we're going to say public get name, and remember we need to return a string, and there are no inputs, and we're just going to return this dot name. Okay, so remember this means we're talking about this class, right? So the variable specific to this class. So let's create another getter method for the toy list. So public array list strings get toy list. Okay, and we're going to return this dot toy list. Great. So now we can control how we actually retrieve these variable values. So the next thing we want to do is actually create setter methods. So to create a setter method, we can actually take in inputs to this method and set the value of the instance variables to whatever value is passed in as an input. So we say public void, right? We're not returning, we're not outputting anything. We're just setting the values of our instance variables. So we can say set name, and we want our input to be a string. We're also going to call it name. So this will show you the importance of using this dot name. So this dot name is referring to the actual class name, right? The class variable name, because we put this in front of it. And we can say equal to name. So because we did not put this in front of this variable name, it's referring to this local input called name. Okay, so this is assigning the class variable name to whatever we pass in as an input. And we're going to do the same for the array list. Set toy list. We're going to pass an array list of strings. And we're going to call it toy list. And we can say this dot toy list equals toy list. Okay, great. Now we have getter and setter methods. So if we go back to our dog test class, now in order to set the values of this, we have to do things slightly differently. So what we can do is now let's remove this, and we can say dog1 dot set name, and now we can pass in chance as a string. Okay, and then in the same way, we can create a new array list. We'll say toy list, temp toy list. So array list of strings equals new array list. Okay, and then we can add to this temp toy list. Let's make this capitalized. Dot add ball. Okay, so now we can remove this. And what we're going to do is now we can say dog1.set toy list, and we can pass in the temp toy list as an input. And now it's going to set the toy list property variable of the dog object to this temp toy list that we just created. Okay, so now if we want to actually display the values of dog1, we could say system.out.println. It will say name dog1, and now we can use the getter methods, right? The accessor method that we created called get name. And we can say system.out.println and let's print out. We know that there's only one value, so we're just going to print out the first element, the toy at the first index of the toy list array. So we can say toy plus dog1 dot get toy list and dot 0. So notice that this part is returning an array list, right? An array list of the toys as strings, an array list of strings. And then we add in this dot get. This is a property of an array list that gets a specific index. So we're saying index 0. So we should be able to print out the name, chance, and the toys, just ball. And so if we run this, remember running the dog test, you see name, chance, toys, ball. Okay, so good. So this is the idea of accessor and getter methods. So the next thing we want to actually do is create a constructor. So let's create a constructor, a custom overloaded constructor. So what we can do is, remember, constructors have to have the same name as the class. So we're going to say public dog. They don't return anything. So notice there's no return type. Create dog. So the first constructor is not going to have any input. We're just going to set this dot name equal to empty string. So it's just initializing. And this dot toy list equals new array list, and just an empty array list. Okay, so this is a constructor that we're determining how the instance variables are set when you create a new instance of a dog. Okay, when you don't pass any parameters. Now let's do another constructor, right? So this is constructor overloading, where we say, let's pass in inputs. So we could say string name and array list string toy list. Okay, so now we can say, let's make sure we have brackets. This dot name is equal to the name that's passed in, and this dot toy list is equal to the array list called toy list that's passed in as an input. Okay, so this is constructor overloading. So now you can create an instance of a dog, right? A dog, the dog object. And when you do that, you can actually pass in the name and the array list for toys. And this will be automatically set to the instance variables of that object. Okay, great. So these are two constructors, our getter methods and our setter methods. Okay, so say we wanted to actually test out this constructor. Use the second constructor that we created, the one that actually you pass in inputs and sets the variables of the class that way. So if you go to our dog test class, remember this class is used to actually test this dog class that we created. Let's create another instance of a dog, but this time when we create it, we're going to use the overloaded constructor, which uses inputs, right? You pass in inputs to set the properties of the dog. So first, let's create a dog name. We'll say string dog name equals call this dog Bella. And let's create another toy list. We'll say array list strings temp toy list 2 equals new array list. And we're going to add to this temp toy list a toy called, let's also give it maybe a ball. And we're also going to add another toy to this list, maybe a bone. Okay. Sorry, this should be temp toy list 2 because it's the second list. So now we have a dog name and a toy list. So that now we can create a new instance of a dog. We'll call this dog 2. So we'll say dog2 equals new dog. Now this is where it's different. So we're actually going to pass in the dog name and the toy list as arguments to this dog constructor. So we're going to say dog name in temp toy list 2. Okay, so now if we do the same thing, if we print out the dog name and toy list, we should see the appropriate names, Bella, and toys, ball, and bone. So let's do that. So system.out.println name dog2. We're going to say dog2.getName, right? We're going to use the getter method. And we're going to also print out toy list, toys, we'll say dog2, and we're going to say dog2.get toy list. So this is just going to get the entire array and just print out the array. Okay, and I misspelled array here. Let's fix that. Okay, so now let's see if it is what we expect. So now we create a new instance of a dog. We're using this constructor where you actually pass in the inputs directly. So now we don't need to actually use the setter methods that we used before. Remember before we used these setter methods. We don't need to use those because we already set them through when we instantiated the dog2, right? We did that through the constructor. So then we just called the getter methods to actually get the name of the toy list, and we're printing them. So let's run. And there you go. You see you have dog2, Bella, and dog2 toys, ball, and bone. Great. So that is just an example of how you can use the different constructors. So I also wanted to show you a method that was created called create new dog. So notice this is in the same class as the dog class. And what this create new dog class does is ask the user to enter the dog name, right? So that's here. Then ask the user to continuously enter toy names and saves it in an array list of strings called temp toy list. So this is a do while loop that continuously asks the user if they want to enter another toy name and stores each toy name into the temp toy list. And then when they're done entering the toy names, they can then we then create a new instance of a dog, and we use the constructor that allows us to pass in arguments. So we pass in the dog name and the dog toy list that were just created, and we can return this new dog object. Okay, so this is the create new dog method, and this is analogous to your create new recipe method of your project. So let's actually test this. So if we go to our dog test class, let's create another instance of a dog, right? We'll call this dog3 and equals new dog. Okay, so we'll just use the basic constructor. Okay, so now we're going to actually call that create new dog method that we just created. So we're going to say dog3 equals dog3.create new dog. So notice we can do this because we've already created an instance of a dog, right, called dog3. And that dog3 has the method create new dog. And create new dog returns a dog type. So that's why we can assign it back to dog3. So this is going to prompt the user, once this is called, it's going to prompt the user for the name and the list of toys, and then assign the new dog that's created, right, because it's returning a dog object, and we're assigning it that new dog object that it returns, we're assigning it back to dog3. Okay, so that's what that's doing. So let's actually print out the results to make sure it is doing what is expected. So we're going to say system.out.println name, print quotes, name dog3, and we're going to say dog3, use the accessor method, get name, and we're going to do the same for the toy list. Get toy list accessor method. Okay, so let's run this and make sure it does what we expect. So it prints out the dog1 and dog2, right, what we had before, and now it asks us for entering the dog name. So now it's at the point where we actually call the create new dog method. So let's call this dog Brutus, and we're going to enter a toy name. Let's say tennis ball, and yes, let's enter one more toy. We'll say rubber bone, and no, we're done. There we go. And if you notice, it printed out the name Brutus and tennis ball and rubber bone as the toys. So in your project, the other option, you're creating a list of recipes, and each recipe has a list of ingredients, and you have the option of initially in Stepping Stone Lab 5 to just create a list of strings for the ingredient names. But the better option was to create a list of ingredient objects. So we're going to do something similar in this example, where instead of just having a list of toy names, we're going to have a list of toy objects. So we're going to create a new class called toy, and the toy is going to have a name, so a toy name, and we're just going to say toy color. Okay, so let's do that. New class, call it toy. Okay, so public class toy, this is going to have a string called name, and we're also going to have a string called color. Okay, so these are the two attributes of a toy. So let's create getter and setter methods. So we're going to say public void set name, and say string. So this is going to set the name. We say this dot name equals name. Do the same for the color. And then we're going to have getter methods. And this is actually going to return a string. It's going to return this dot name. And let's make sure we name these properly. Okay, so now we have getter and setter methods. Alright, so let's actually use this within the dog class. So now, before we had an array list of strings, right? Let's change this to being an array list of toys. So we're going to change this to toys. So we're in the dog class. We're changing its array list of strings that have the toy list names to now an array list of toy objects, because now we have this toy class. Okay, so we need to just change anywhere we see a string. We want to change this to toy. So now we're passing an array list of toys here as well for the getter and setter. Okay, so the create new dog method will also change. I'll let you guys think about how this will change. I just want to introduce the concept. So now that we have a dog class that uses an array list of toys opposed to strings, let's see how that's going to change when we actually test it. So notice now that we have these errors, right? Because now the set toy list is expecting an array list of toys, but we still have it as a string. Same for this constructor. For the dog, it's expecting an array list of toys opposed to an array list of strings. So just for showing a demonstration, I'm going to remove the dog 2 and dog 3 that we did before. I'm going to remove this and just show you an example using dog 1. Okay, so now that we have dog 1, let's see how this will change so that we use the toy class, an array list of toys, opposed to an array list of strings. So setting the name of the dog object will not change, right? We didn't change anything there. So we can still set the name of the dog the same way. Now setting the toy list, right, it will be different because now we're using an array list of toys opposed to an array list of strings. So let's remove this. And what we're going to do, we're going to create 2 toy objects. We're going to add it to an array list of toys. And then we're going to add this array list of toys to the dog object, right? We're going to set the dog's toy list to be this new array list of toys that we're creating. So let's do that. So let's create a new object of a toy. Say toy1 equals new toy. Okay, so using a default constructor, and we're going to do the same for toy2 equals new toy. So now we have the getter and setter methods, so we can actually set the attributes of the toy1 and toy2 using the setter methods. So we can say toy1 dot set name, and we're going to name this toy ball. Okay, and we're going to set the color to be green. Okay, I'm sorry, this should be set color. Right, so this is the set color setter method. So we're setting the name and color of toy1 to ball and green respectively. Let's do the same for toy2. So toy2 dot set name, and we're going to name this rubber bone, and the color will be red. Okay, so now we have the name and color set for toy1 and toy2. So now let's create a new array list of toys. So we're going to say array list toy instead of string. We're going to call it toy list equals new array list. And what we can do is add toy1 and add toy2 to this array list. So toy list dot add toy1 and toy list dot add toy2. So we created 2 new objects of a toy, toy1 and toy2, and we added them to an array list of toys called toy list using the add method of an array list. Okay, great. So now we have a toy list. So now what we can actually do is use the setter method of the dog object, right, of the dog class, and use that to actually assign the toy list attribute of the dog, of dog1. So what we're going to do is we're going to call dog1 dot set toy list. Sorry, let's try that again. Dog set. And notice you can even see here it's expecting an array list of toys now, right? Because we modified the dog class setter method, this setter method, to take in an array list of toys opposed to an array list of strings. So we're going to say set toy list, and we can pass in toy list. And that's it. So now we've set the toy list. So now we've set the name and the toy list. Okay, so that's it. So we've changed this so that we've actually assigned the the toy list of a dog to be a toy list of toys opposed to a toy list of just strings holding the toy name. And again, this is analogous, this is similar to the idea of using an ingredient object opposed to an ingredient name only when creating the array list for your recipe ingredients. Okay, so let's actually print out the results to make sure it is what we expect. So this is also going to slightly change. So the name, we can use the get name method. This will be slightly different because remember now this get toy list is going to return a toy object, right? So a list of the toy objects. So let's change this slightly. So we're going to delete this part. And let's print out each toy name and color one by one. So we're going to use a for loop to do this. So first let's get the actual toy list. So we'll say temp toy list equals dog1 dot get toy list. So we're using the getter method to get the toy list. And remember, we have to assign this to be an array list of toys. Okay, there we go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get the size of this temp toy list and iterate through each toy, which should be 2, and we're going to print out the name and color of each toy. Okay, so let's do a for loop. For, we're going to say int I equals 0. I is less than temp toy list dot size. Remember, this returns the size of the array list. So for us it will be 2. So while it's less than 2, and we're going to increment I at each iteration. So now let's actually print out the name and color of each toy. So we're going to say system.out.println toy color plus, and so this is going to be temp toy list dot get I, and we're going to get the color. So let's do the same thing for the name. So let's print out the name first. Toy name temp toy list dot get I dot get name. Okay, so this is going to print out the toy name and toy color. So we can even actually put in maybe an index that print out the index of the one we're looking at. So maybe we'll also say put an intermediate, say plus I plus 1. And I'll explain what this is doing. Parentheses. Okay, so what we're doing here is actually printing out the index also plus 1. So the first one is going to be I equals 0. So this is going to say toy name 1, so the first toy name, in parentheses 1, and it's going to print out the name, and then we're going to do the same idea for the color. Alright, so we're printing out the toy name and toy color for each toy in the array list of toys. Okay, so we print out the name, we're printing out the toy name and color, and that is it. So let's make sure it does what we expect. So let's run this. Run the test. And there we go. So you notice toy name. So the name is Chance, right? Name is Chance, and toy, the toys, we have toy name 1, ball, color green, toy name 2, rubber bone, and color is red. That is what we set here. So it did what we expected. So this just explains how you can actually go from using just an array list of strings holding just the toy name to an array list of toy objects. Okay, so this is the same idea that you want to use when you're doing your recipe in recipe test class, right? When you're working on these, right? So initially you're using an ingredient name. So you're using an array list of strings holding the ingredient names, but eventually, especially for milestone 2, you want to switch over to using the ingredient object, right? You want to use an array list of ingredient objects opposed to an array list of strings. So I hope this all makes sense. I hope this helps you with your project. If you have any questions with this example, with your project, or anything else right now in the class, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks.